What's going on, knuckleheads? Welcome back to the Fighters Rep video podcast. I'm your host, the Fighters Rep. And my goodness, has it been a hot minute since we've had some fights to talk about. And today we're going to be talking about UFC 249. This is our preview prediction. Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje. And, it looks like we're finally getting some sort of semblance of normalcy in this crazy world we live in, where a pandemic has swept through and kind of killed every single sport alive. And it's fitting that the UFC is the first sport to kind of, jump back into the forefront. I know we had some boxing matches out in Nicaragua or whatnot, but this is the first big event I think we're having since the pandemic, and I'm very excited about it. It's going down at the VyStar Veterans Memorial Arena in Jacksonville, Florida, a state that I'm very familiar with, and you can watch, on ESPN Plus as well as pay-per-views. So let's get into it like we used to do, like we normally do. We're going to be, talking about these fighters a little bit and giving you our predictions. Let's start off with the main event and kind of, taper off from there. So, the main event is Justin Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson. This is a fight. This is a fight that's bound to be one of the best MMA fights that I think you're going to see in your life. On paper and off of paper, this looks like a fight that can go down as one of the greatest fights we've ever seen if both of these guys come out and perform the way we believe that they could perform. At this time, I want to let you guys know that Tony Ferguson is a minus 150 favorite. So, Gaethje, not a huge underdog here, and for good reason. He's won 3 fights in a row, all in the first round with finishes. And his last fight is actually a guy that they both have in common as the last fight. And Donald Cowboy Cerrone, a guy who was finished also by Conor McGregor. But, before that, Justin Gaethje finished him. And Tony Ferguson finished him. There's quite a bit we can delve into here, but we'll just try to keep it simple here. I mean, I feel like Tony Ferguson, he's definitely going to have the reach advantage in this fight. And I think he has the advantage on the ground, right? He's got the advantage on the ground as far as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu goes. That's typically what he relies on. Then you've got Justin Gaethje, who's got this wrestling base, a very strong wrestling base, but we never see him use it because he is a hard-nosed, grinded out kind of wrestler, and that's how he is as a fighter. He just comes forward, he throws hard leg kicks, he's a human buzzsaw, he's just coming for you. Tony Ferguson does well in the chaos. He seems to be able to find himself in the chaos in situations where you would think a regular guy would get finished when he's hurt. That doesn't happen that often to Tony Ferguson, right? We've seen him hurt in a few situations, and one of the situations that come to mind is when Anthony Pettis had him hurt. I also think about that Venata fight. I feel like Venata had him hurt as well. I mean, Tony Ferguson is a guy who can get outstruck and hurt at any time during the fight, but it's just, he takes a while, I feel like, to warm up, and once he's warmed up, he's just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. I mean, his cardio is absolutely off the charts. He probably has the best cardio out of anybody. I mean, really. And he's 5'11", which is huge for the division, with a 76.5-inch reach advantage. Apparently 6 inches longer in reach for Tony Ferguson. So, I mean, as long as he kind of keeps this thing on the outside, I think he'll have a lot of success. Also, if they get to the ground, I think he'll be more comfortable there especially in in anything to do with jiu-jitsu, because Tony Ferguson is just an absolute beast when it comes to jiu-jitsu. That being said, Justin Gaethje is not really the kind of guy that's going to give you that distance. He's going to come for you. He's going to come for you. And we haven't seen really a lot of his, takedowns, his takedown defense, what he looks like on the ground, his jiu-jitsu or anything like that. But something tells me that the guy is just a physical specimen as far as wrestling goes. That's probably why nobody's really taking him down. And he could fight. I mean, the guy could fight standing like an absolute savage. And I see this fight, as a very even fight. I see this fight as a very even fight. I do think they can really hurt each other on the feet. Tony Ferguson much more awkward than Justin Gaethje, but Justin Gaethje just a brutally offensive guy who's in his most recent fights become a little bit more efficient and smarter about his striking, but still brutal, kind of a berserker out there, and I like it. That's why I think this fight is all entertainment. So, very close on the feet. I would probably give the edge to Justin Gaethje on the feet. I just think, his style, that pressure style, the fact that we've seen Tony Ferguson get hurt a few times, the nonstop leg kicks, the nonstop just swinging for the fences. I mean, Tony Ferguson, I don't think is going to fare that well against a guy who has that pressure style, right? We look back to that Barboza fight. Barboza is more of a guy that kind of moves around, kind of backs away, more of a finesse fighter. This Gaethje, man, he's a pressure fighter. He's just going to come. He's just going to keep coming. And that's why I don't like it for Ferguson on the feet. I think he has the advantage on the ground, but will he be able to get Gaethje there? I'm going to go with the spoiler on this one, you guys. I have a bad feeling about this fight. I feel like Gaethje has been much more active recently, not coming off that major surgery that Tony Ferguson had. And even though he came back and won after that, he's up there in age. I believe he's 5 or 6 years older than Gaethje. And I just see Gaethje being a little too tough, assuming he fights to the best of his ability. I feel like he might be a little bit too tough for Tony Ferguson, just because, and not because he can outlast Tony Ferguson, but because he could hurt him and he could finish him, and his style is just so crazy. The only other outcome I could see, besides Gaethje mauling Ferguson and potentially finishing him, is Gaethje winning a decision, maybe winning the first 3 rounds, Ferguson coming back in the last 2, or Ferguson winning this thing by decision, or maybe, tapping Gaethje out. But again, at the end of the day, I just feel like Gaethje, man, too much of a savage. He's just too much of a savage, and so is Tony. I just feel like he hasn't been as active. He's 5 years older. He's 36 years old versus a 31-year-old Justin Gaethje who seems to be priming. We don't know where Tony Ferguson in his career is right now, man. If it was an active Tony Ferguson that did not come off that big surgery he had, I would pick Tony Ferguson in this fight. And even despite, these issues, the age, the surgery, the activity, I still think, it's a very close, 50-50 fight. But I got to go with Justin Gaethje just because I feel like his style, that relentless pressure style, the power strikes, all that stuff is going to be a big problem for Ferguson unless he could slow Gaethje down, which he absolutely has the ability to do. Big shout out to Mike Colleen, Conscious Power. He's in here. Appreciate you being in here, brother. So, as hard as it is for me to say, I really feel like Justin Gaethje is going to win this fight. It's just a feeling. I could totally be wrong. I've been wrong before. I just think he's a bad matchup for Tony Ferguson. So let's kind of go on to the next fight. We've also got Henry Cejudo taking on Dominic Cruz in this fight. Obviously, when I look at these guys physically, I see Dominic Cruz as the taller, longer fighter with the better footwork, potentially, and the better stand-up, you would say. However, Henry Cejudo has looked really, really good in the stand-up in his past few fights. We all know he's basically unfuckwittable when it comes to the wrestling as an Olympian. Let's just put it at that. But he has been beaten. He has been beaten by somebody considered one of the best of all time in Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson in the clinch. Is where he got beaten. So, who knows what a crafty veteran like Dominic Cruz can do. A guy in Dominic Cruz who actually beat, he actually beat DJ. He actually beat Mighty Mouse. But, that was a Dominic Cruz that was at the absolute top of his game. Dominic Cruz now is a Dominic Cruz that is 35 years old. Now, granted, he'll have a huge height and reach advantage over Henry Cejudo. I believe Cruz is about 5'8". Yes, and Henry Cejudo is 5'4" tall. They don't even list, I don't even see Cejudo's reach on here. I don't even see it on here, but this is going to be an entertaining fight. But I just don't see the 35-year-old Dominic Cruz going in there against the 33-year-old Henry Cejudo, who's been on an absolute tear and beaten the who's who of anyone in and around his division. I just don't see Dominic Cruz having that success. Although, Dominic Cruz is a tough, pesky veteran. He can move. He has great movement. He's got good striking. He may be able to use that unorthodox striking to kind of, knock Cejudo out of his game. But we've seen time and time again, man, Cejudo finds a way to win in that Moraes fight. He looked like, Moraes was getting to him, and then he just took over and stopped a guy who had just been tearing through the division like a hot knife through butter. So, I don't know. I just feel like Henry Cejudo, besides his wrestling credentials, has just too much momentum on his side. Too much momentum, too much confidence. He's a guy with 5 wins in a row. And the last 4 wins, I mean, look at this competition. Sergio Pettis, Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, TJ Dillashaw, and Marlon Moraes. If we take a look at Dominic Cruz's past few opponents and a career that I think has been a lot less active, we have a loss in his last fight against Cody Garbrandt, which happened back in December of 2016. I mean, so this is a Dominic Cruz coming back after being almost 4 years out the game, 3.5 years out the game, and I'm not loving his chances here, especially considering the fact that he's coming off of a loss that's 3.5 years old. So, if anything, I actually don't think they should have even put him in there. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I would have liked to see maybe Cejudo fighting somebody who's more deserving in the division as opposed to a guy who's been out for 3.5 to 4 years coming off of a loss. So, that's how I feel about that. On to the next bout, we've got Francis Ngannou, somebody who's always an absolute blast to watch, against another guy who's really, really entertaining to watch in Jairzinho Rozenstruik. I hope I'm saying that right. Jairzinho Rozenstruik, and he's a guy who's looked really impressive. He's undefeated in mixed martial arts. He has a deep kickboxing background, but he's undefeated in MMA. He's in the UFC alone. He's 4-0. His last 4 wins have been against Alistair Overeem, Andrei Arlovsky, Alan Crowder, and Junior Albini. All pretty good fighters, especially the Alistair Overeem win was pretty impressive. But, then again, Overeem, Arlovsky, these are guys that are definitely in the latter part of their career. Then we look at Francis Ngannou, who's definitely going to have some physical advantages in this fight, being a 6'4" absolute monster. Not that Jairzinho isn't. But we look at Francis and we see he TKO'd Junior Dos Santos in his last fight. He did the same, I thought, to Cain Velasquez in the fight before, although it looks like, that was considered some sort of technical win. I don't know. And then he also TKO'd Curtis Blades. His only losses have been that very uneventful fight where his, confidence had been shattered prior against Stipe Miocic, and that, again, that uneventful fight against Derek Lewis. But again, his confidence was kind of wavering after that Stipe Miocic fight, which was definitely, a tough fight. He's also knocked out Alistair Overeem and Andrei Arlovsky, and he knocked out Alistair Overeem in a way that, we've never seen a knockout before in our lives. Jairzinho, 6 feet 2 inches tall, just 32 years old. He's got a 78-inch reach and weighs 247 pounds. So he's a big boy. But then, you've got Francis Ngannou with an 83-inch reach. That's massive. He outweighs Jairzinho. He weighs in at typically at 254 pounds and a couple inches taller. Where Jairzinho can capitalize, though, is, he's a striker. He's a kickboxer. He knows what he's doing in there. And if he gets in on the inside, he could bang Francis Ngannou out of there. All these heavyweights, if they land the right shot on each other, the fight is absolutely over. So, I'm going to give you my prediction on that one, too. I'm going to give you my prediction on Cejudo first. I do think Cejudo gets it done against Dominic Cruz. It'll probably be a late finish or a decision win because Cruz will probably go into survival mode. And that's what I think about that. And then as far as the Francis Ngannou and Jairzinho fight, I think that's a real toss-up, man. I think Jairzinho is a real live dog in there. I think he could hurt or finish Francis Ngannou. I think Francis Ngannou can do the same thing. But, because I believe in boxing, the boxing of Francis Ngannou, the size, the strength, I'm going to have to pick Ngannou in that fight. I don't know if it's a knockout. Probably not. I feel like Jairzinho is really very experienced. But I could see that happening. I could also see Jairzinho knocking Ngannou out. I don't think this fight lasts the distance. Probably ends in some sort of TKO, but I'm going to have to pick Francis Ngannou on that one. So let's go to the next one. We've got, a couple more fights I want to talk about. We've got Calvin Kattar, or Calvin Kattar, whatever people want to call him, versus Jeremy Stephens. I see this as a good fight for Calvin Kattar, man. I don't think, and he's the favorite to win this fight, I think, for good reason. I think Jeremy Stephens has just been very, I think he's been a bit erratic throughout his career. I don't know what to expect when he's in there. Sometimes I think he's a killer. Sometimes, I don't know. Sometimes I think he's not that great. He hasn't shown me a consistency that makes me confident in his abilities. I feel like Kattar's actually, a pretty good fighter. He chose to go out to Russia and take on Zabit last November. He lost a close decision there, and I think his stock rose. And, as strong and as tough as Jeremy Stephens is, and as big of a powerful right hand as he has, I feel like, Kattar is a better all-around fighter. He's got good defense, and I could see him, winning that fight. I could see him winning a decision on that one. Then we've got Greg Hardy versus Yorgan De Castro. This is going to be another good fight, man. This is going to be another good fight. They've got Greg Hardy listed as the favorite right now. De Castro has finished 5 of his 6 wins. He's won by first round, knockout. That's how he got the UFC contract at Dana White's Contender Series. We saw what he did with, I think it was Junior Tafa. He's got the ability to really put you to sleep. And I think this is going to be a good fight. I think it's tough, man. I think it's a tough pick. I don't think Greg Hardy is going to be able to beat this guy, even though he's listed as the favorite. I think Yorgan De Castro is an underrated guy. I think he's a guy that's going to... be able to connect at some point on Hardy and show Hardy that this is not, football, that this is fighting. And fighting, as cliche as it sounds, requires a fighter's heart, requires a certain skill set, requires a certain mentality. And as tough as Greg Hardy is, and as much as he may be looking the part, I just feel like De Castro is just... he's a fighter at the end of the day, and I think he's going to win that fight in what should be a very entertaining fight. Bunch of great fights on this card, man. Bunch of great fights on this card. I just wanted to touch on one more. I see Anthony Pettis is going to be fighting Donald Cerrone. I see Anthony Pettis is the favorite here. I think he's the favorite for good reason. I don't think Cowboy Cerrone has much left, if I'm being honest with you. He had that tremendous streak and then just seems to have rattled off a bunch of losses. Let's just take a look at Cerrone's last few fights. He's also 37 years of age. And, he's lost... 3 out of the last 3. I mean, his last win was in 2019, which is not too long ago. Obviously, Cerrone fights like 20 times a year. But his last one was against Al Iaquinta. He then lost to Tony Ferguson, no slouch there. He got TKO'd though. Doctor stopped the fight. Justin Gaethje then TKO'd him in the first round. And, that was a legit TKO. And then we saw what Conor McGregor did to him in 40 seconds. So, I don't think, I don't think he's got much left, if I'm being honest. 37 years old. He's a fan favorite. But I just don't think he beats Anthony Pettis, who I also think is in the twilight of his career, but is just a bit too explosive, I think. Maybe a bit too explosive for the Cowboy. We'll see, though. I could be totally wrong about this fight. And we get, a vintage Cowboy Cerrone performance. Excuse me. So before I continue, I'm going to ask that you guys hit the subscribe button below, the bell notification icon next to it. Join Knucklehead Nation. We do this every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And immediately after the fight, we also get together and talk about the fight. So we give you guys a forum to discuss the fight. Everybody's opinion is welcome at Fighters Rep. Just subscribe, hit the bell notification icon, like this video, and you'd have joined Knucklehead Nation. Also, we're the only kickboxing promotion in California that puts on professional kickboxing bouts. That being said, please continue to support us. Anything you donate in the super chat or buy in the links below, like these dope Fighters Rep shirts and the links below, those are reinvested right back into Fighters Rep, where we're building what I think is, one of the most exciting promotions in the state, easily, probably in the country, with some of the most talented young fighters in the world. If you don't know, Southern California, or California in general, is the mecca of combat sports, and we've got some awesome fighters. You can watch our fights for free. We air them for free right on this channel. And I don't know how long that's going to last because these fights are absolutely sick. But definitely subscribe, hit the bell notification icon next to it if you haven't already. Let's see what we got here. So we got Fight Life Nation in the chat. He says, I like Gaethje. I like Cruz. Cejudo had a big win against Moraes, but Cruz won't just stand in front of him. And you might be right about that. You might be right about that. I think about Cruz's movement and I see how tricky it is. But man, could you imagine the task of having to take on Henry Cejudo, who's been on an absolute tear, beating the best of the best for the past year or so, and you got to go in there and fight him coming off a loss that's 3.5 years old? That's just tough, man. That's just tough. Fight Life Nation says, I think Cejudo's last few wins are fluky outside of Moraes. Oh. And the Mighty Mouse fight was super close. Dillashaw couldn't take a punch after losing all that weight. I think he gets exposed. Hey, I look forward to it, man. I look forward to it, Marco, and I look forward to seeing you right here in the forum immediately after helping me moderate this thing. Fight Life Nation says Francis is a monster. It's so hard to pick against him, but he has shown that he's capable of freezing under pressure. That's true. The heavyweights are going to bring the fire this card. Verdum versus Oleinik is buried on the undercard. I saw that too. But those guys, more grapplers. So, maybe in that fight what we'll get is two grapplers who decide that their grappling is going to cancel each other out and who decide to just throw hands instead. That would be a lot of fun if that happened. I think Stevens, Marco says, I think Stevens should start to look at hanging it up. Like Cowboy's exciting to watch, but he has a lot of wear and tear and doesn't hold up well as the fight goes on. That's true. I don't like Greg Hardy on the pay-per-view over Verdum. I don't know if it really matters, but I feel like the UFC is pushing him more as a sideshow than anything. He does have, that fame and that controversy surrounding him, and as long as he's got that, he's probably going to be more marketable in a fight against De Castro, who is a knockout artist, than Verdum Oleinik is going to be. So I think it's disrespectful towards Verdum. I agree with you 100% on that. But from a business standpoint, I could see why they're doing that. Fight Life Nation says, and I like Hardy. He showed he was tough in the Volkov fight. So, Marco thinks Hardy's going to win, even though he doesn't like him being over Verdum on the on the main card. Also says, with a win, would you think that Verdum puts himself back in the title picture, even though he's been gone forever? If DC beats Stipe and retires, someone has to fight for the vacant strap. He does. I mean, unfortunately, the heavyweight division in the UFC is still, it's gotten better, but it's still a little thin. I like Jairzinho's addition. I like the fact, that Blades is out there. I like Ngannou, of course, Stipe in DC. But, outside of that, I mean, Verdum is an old guy, man. Verdum is an old horse with a lot of mileage on him. As is Oleinik. So it's just, it's tough. It's a tough call. A lot of these guys are older. That includes DC, of course. And I think, it's time for some new blood in the heavyweight division. But until that happens, yes, if Verdum wins, he's probably back in the title picture. Fight Life Nation says, what are you drinking? Cherry Kool-Aid, don't worry about what I'm drinking, brother, but it sure ain't the Kool-Aid, my man. I don't drink any Kool-Aid, literally or figuratively. Remember that. Fight Life Nation says there are 10 interesting fights on this card. That is something boxing just can't do. You could never say something like that. Boxing could absolutely do that. It just chooses not to do that. But you're right. They do a much better job. They do a much better job putting great fights together than boxing does. Or at least an entire card. Neil the Security says, what's up, brother? What's up, Neil? Thank you for joining us, my man. I appreciate you being in here, brother. He says, don't make this a boxing versus an MMA thing. Yeah, definitely. Let's not get into that. Because, that argument, we could just go all day long. What we need to do at a time like this, with this pandemic, what we need to do is enjoy the fact that we even have a fight this weekend, guys. It's been so long. Look at me. I look a mess. I need a shave. I need a haircut. And it's because I haven't had anything in my life, to use as an outlet or fighters to live vicariously through. So it's going to be a huge deal to finally have some fights this weekend. And if it was boxing, MMA, both at the same time, I'd be watching them all. So that's what I'll say about that. Fight Life Nation says it is thin, George. It's about 8 deep at most, and I agree. and Marco's referring to the heavyweight division. I mean, the heavyweight division in the UFC is thin, man. It's thin in MMA, and that's why I tell guys, like, we got a young fighter out here. He's the state of California Camo heavyweight champion. That means he's the best heavyweight in California, essentially, based on him being the champion for Camo, which is the sanctioning body for amateurs. His name is Lou Schwenke. He trains out of CMMA, big tough Samoan kid. And I tell him, man, that heavyweight division in MMA, wide open. So let's take a look right now at the UFC's heavyweight rankings. I want to take a look real quick. Let's see what we got here. We've got pound for pound. That's interesting. Heavyweight. All right. I hope these are the UFC's rankings. Okay, we've got Stipe Miocic as the champ. And then we've got Daniel Cormier, of course, who's like 40 years old or something. Makes sense. Francis Ngannou, Curtis Blades. Now we've got Junior Dos Santos and Derek Lewis. So a bunch of big, tough guys. I think we may see Jairzinho break into this after this Ngannou fight. Bunch of big, tough guys, man, but still kind of thin, man. I mean, Derek Lewis is a fun watch, but is he somebody that I believe can be a UFC heavyweight champion? I don't know, man. Unless he lands a really big lucky punch on somebody, I don't see him beating like a high-level heavyweight. But, I mean, that's what's exciting about the heavyweight division. You can win with that one crazy punch, but I just feel like his all-around skill set. I mean, if a guy like that is in your top 5, and no offense to him, or even a guy in Junior Dos Santos at this point who's so much older, or, Curtis Blades, who's a decent fighter. I mean, you can't compare that level of talent, for instance, to, let's take a look at the welterweight division, Kamaru Usman's the champ. Woodley's first contender. Covington is second. Masvidal's third. Leon Edwards is fourth. Damian Maia's fifth. I mean, those are a bunch of killers outside of Maia, who I think is, way too old to be on here. But you know what I mean? Now let's look at middleweight. Adesanya, Whitaker, Costa, Romero, Cannonier, Darren Till. God, that's a stacked division, But, Curtis Blades and, Derek Lewis, Junior Dos Santos at this point. I mean, even Francis Ngannou, he's still pretty green for the sport. I mean, if you consider the amount of, the amount of time he's been in the sport. So, that's why I feel like the heavyweight division isn't as strong as a lot of the other divisions, and why, I don't know, why I think it's kind of weak. Let's hear Fight Knife Nation says that Tony versus Justin is such an interesting fight. I agree. Tony's a savage, but he does get hit, and Justin hits hard and is very reckless. Yes. And you know what? He's been less reckless lately. Justin has. He's been less reckless. Also, I like Tony, man. I really like Tony. But I like Justin too. But anyway, the point is I like Tony a lot, man. But, man, he does get hurt. He gets hit and he gets hurt. And he retreats. And he's been able to bail himself out, Several times he's been able to bail himself out. But he's never fought a guy quite like Justin Gaethje, where the guy has that relentless pace, that relentless cardio. I mean, he's not going to let you off the hook if he hurts you. Those other guys, they hurt Tony, they couldn't capitalize. I feel like if Justin hurts him, he's going to be able to capitalize. So, and Fight Life Nation says, I can see Tony being stopped, but man, no one's been able to do it yet, and I agree with that. And I can see him winning this fight too. I mean, he could win it easily. He can get him to the ground, submit him. I mean, and that's all she wrote, Or he can, hit Gaethje with an elbow and put him to sleep. I mean, we don't know. I think this fight will show us, if this fight will really gauge Tony Ferguson. I mean, you cannot bullshit in a fight against Justin Gaethje. You cannot. The guy, what Justin Gaethje is he's a fucking buzzsaw. He's a chainsaw coming at you. And you can either survive that shit or you can't. And the strong will survive and the weak will not. And we will be able to gauge Tony Ferguson and whether he can have a shot against Khabib Nurmagomedov. I think with this fight, we'll be able to really gauge Tony Ferguson. If Tony Ferguson can handle Justin Gaethje in convincing fashion, then man, he really is as brilliant as many people think he is. Fight Life Nation says Blades will not get another fight against Francis. Overeem is done. I heard Dos Santos is looking at moving down. Wow, that's crazy if that happens. Neil the Security says Lewis is highly overrated. Wilder of MMA, pretty much. I can see that analogy a little bit, but man, Wilder was undefeated, hadn't really fought anybody. You can't say that about Lewis because the UFC forces you to fight everybody. And Lewis did fight Ngannou in a shit fight, but he still fought him and won. And then we saw what happened to him against Cormier, man. He got absolutely just schooled, and I just don't see him having success at the highest level unless he makes some serious changes. Fight Life Nation says, I think if someone is not a fan of MMA, this is a great card with a variety of styles to introduce them to the game. I agree with that 100%, man. There's some fantastic fighters on this card, fantastic fights. And man, Dana White has got the biggest balls in sports, man, to pull this shit off in Florida. And it had to be my home state of Florida to sanction some shit like this. Big shout out, a lot of love to my people in Florida. In all seriousness, I hope nobody gets sick from this event. I am worried about this coronavirus shit. Obviously, we can't do any events in California. This month would have been Fighters Rep 10. Of course, we had to postpone that or cancel it or whatever you want to call it because fights are not allowed to happen right now. But this would have been the month. But, big shout out to Florida. They're giving it a try. I don't know how I feel about this, man. I'm worried people are going to be sick. But at the same time, do we just keep the freaking country closed forever? Until when? Shouldn't our governments have been, more prepared for this kind of thing? I don't know. I don't know. I would have thought that we'd have been more prepared for this kind of thing. Now they're saying this thing came out of a lab. I mean, who the hell knows? What I'm worried about, though, I am worried about people getting sick from this. I'm hoping nobody gets sick. I am excited for fights, but there is that, that worry there in the back of my mind that people might be getting sick. I'm sure the UFC is going to take every precaution necessary. They got that kind of money. But this is a shame, man. This is a shame, and this is one of the few instances of normal activity or one of the few normal things that's happened in a long time, and I look forward to that normalcy. Another great fight low on the card is Luque versus Nico Price. That is a great fight. Luque has a sick KO over one of my favorite SoCal fighters, Jalen Turner. YouTube that. I did see that. And Luque's a beast. And Nico Price is on the cusp of being a top prospect. I think that's a really good fight. I think that's a really, really good fight. Both of those guys are really good fighters. And I look forward to seeing what happens there. Either one of those guys can still continue to improve and become a serious contender in the UFC. That's what I feel about that. But anyway, knuckleheads, that's all I've got for you today. Thank you guys for joining me on another episode, of the Fighters Rep video podcast. I'm your host of Fighters Rep. If you haven't already, subscribe, hit the bell notification icon next to it. Join Knucklehead Nation. We'll be back on Wednesday, on Friday, and you better believe we'll be back on Saturday immediately after the fight. Come here, air your grievances, your comments, your opinions. We look forward to it, knuckleheads. But anyway, until then, knuckleheads, thank you for your time and keep it clean. I'm the Fighters Rep. Let's see it focus. There it is. Kind of. I'm the Fighters Rep and I'm out of here. Have a good one.